Welcome to On the Fly. We are delighted to have another casual conversation, this time about winter skills. Whether you are a coach that can grab some gymnasium space for light technique drills, or maybe even an enclosed turf to put together a more full practice, there's great benefit to offering an opportunity for your new players to learn some of the basic building blocks of the sport of lacrosse, and for your experienced players to come and dust off the cobwebs covering the sticks that have sat patiently in the garage waiting for the next season to begin. So, what are some effective drills? What are some best practices and easy ways to focus on the ever so important individual skills that these kids are going to need to then go out and compete and succeed in a team setting? I'm Joey Picard. I'm joined, as always, by Martin Bose, Coach Bose. Have you run some winter skills in your time? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, a few, two or three.
There you go. Me too. I love the winter skills. What a great time. So why don't we talk about a couple of the key concepts? Let's have you whiteboard. If our audience can is perceptive, they're going to see you got a nice whiteboard behind your shoulder. We're going to utilize that today. We're really excited about that. But before we jump into some drills that you can outline for us, what in general are the principles behind offering an off-season skills-focused session?
Well, like you said, we certainly want to dust off the cobwebs and just get the stick in the hand and have fun, learning the skills and reacclimating yourself to watching the ball into your stick, feeling the ball in your stick, getting used to aiming, whether that's a pass or a shot, and just kind of reinvigorating that excitement of learning the valuable skills. And what I've mentioned in the past, regardless of what position you play, whether it's boys or girls, there are universal skills that every lacrosse player needs to know. And I think winter skills and fall skills training is a great time to kind of emphasize that. And hey, you're a lacrosse player. We need to be able to do, these 8 things. And winter skills is a great time to make that the focus as opposed to, developing as a team per se.
And I know you've been involved in a lot. Have they been very quite formal, or have they been sort of informal, one or two? Talk me through what you typically would do as a town program leader.
Sure. If you have time to do, say, a 4, 6, or 8 week program, that's great. But this is definitely a more casual situation. Even just one session can be incredibly beneficial. So it's not something that we need to make a bigger deal. It's more so let's see if we can get some time. I know field space is expensive, and so there's a lot of different workarounds. You can get into a basketball gym or find different ways in different environments to just get kids with a stick in their hands, and this can be very informal.
Amazing. So in my town, Duxbury, Massachusetts, we run a very formal one with 10 weeks long, 90-minute sessions, and we are quite regimental in terms of having themes for each week. They tend to build on top of each other. We start in week 1, and by the end of week 10, we are building towards team skills, although it's very individual centric to start. In fact, we call it obsession with possession because almost everything we do for the first few weeks is all about gaining possession. That's picking up ground balls, keeping possession, especially things like cradling while you're running. That's a really important skill to teach and drill, especially for new players. That is not an easy motion to master. Passing and catching, that's possession as well. Making sure your team accurately keeps the ball as efficiently as possible through clean and crisp passing and catching. And then eventually we start transforming them into team skills like generating offense, attacking the net. So I think what will be helpful for us in our conversation today is to kind of hit on those pillars of individual skills, the building blocks of the sport. And for me, and tell me if you think I'm off base here, I'm thinking ground balls. I think that's probably one of the most important skills we teach early. I think passing and catching combined together is something that we always have to focus on, even deep into our spring, but no better time than the winter to kind of start focusing on that, teach the techniques and elements of it, give them lots of practice. I like to call the dodging and shooting like attacking the net, right? We kind of encompass your best dodge move, teaching these kids how to have an athletic move to get there and then finish it with the shot. So that I kind of combine that into one, and then your basic defense, which includes footwork. So if we hit those 4 pillars and drill a few of those, I think we'll be in good shape to kind of dissect a typical casual winter skill session.
Love it. I think that's a good breakdown. Another way to think about this, I also have 4 categories. I think we'll touch on all this today. You think about ball reception, that's your scooping and your catching,
Mhm.
ball control, It's your cradling and your dodging. You've got ball release. That's your passing and your shooting. And then you've got your athleticism. That's your off-ball movement, your cutting, and also your defensive footwork, right? So get on a little bit of all those, and you're going to be a complete lacrosse player.
I positively love that. That's a great way to frame it and shape it. So we're saying the same things but differently, and both of them work. I actually really like yours. So from this point forward, it's going to be one. Let's start with ground balls. This is a cliche, but it's so important for coaches to understand, and I'm guilty of this myself. You put these grandiose plans together for a practice in a game where you're just passing the ball around and you're cutting and moving and you have shape and it's all glorious. And then you say, wait a minute, why is the ball on the ground 80% of this game? And it becomes one of the most important skills. So I cannot drill ground balls enough. There's not one practice I have where we don't do some form of ground balls, whether it's individual, whether it's one-on-ones, two-on-twos, whatever it might be. So Winter Skills is a perfect time to hit these. What are some of your favorite ground ball drills?
Well, I'll start with what I would normally start with, and that's to make sure everybody has a ball on their stick. I'm thinking about maximizing repetitions, and I'm just going to line everyone up, say on the midfield line or the baseline or the sideline, and say, hey, roll the ball out, scoop it, take a couple steps, rinse and repeat, head down to the other sideline, blow the whistle. And it's really important on this one that I'm actually telling kids to kind of go slower. I don't want to see you get to the other sideline as fast as you can. I'm going to go over the technique, of course, getting both butts low, getting the ball to your face, and picking your head and eyes up after scooping the ball, not just keeping your head down and doing repeated reps that way, but also putting it in the context of, hey, the most efficient thing to do typically after picking up a ground ball is to scan to look for that next pass. So I'm just going to line everyone up, get high repetitions. That's typically how I start. And where I progress from there is adding the kind of adjacent ground ball skills, which to me are hockeying the ball, so kind of hitting the ball into a different area to then go scoop it, and then footy or soccer, right? Kicking the ball into a different area. All too often, as you mentioned in youth lacrosse, we see the conglomerate of bodies surrounding the ground ball, and sort of as the blob goes, right, as the ball goes, so does the blob around the field, and those can be really helpful skills, kind of that hockey and that footy. So I like to add those in early as well.
That's amazing. So University of Notre Dame, one of the top college programs in the country, they run a very simple ground ball drill. Well, they'll get in a line, and that line will snake around their space, and it's an individual drill. Well, they'll just kick a ball out to themselves. This is on their own tempo, and they'll scoop it up, and then they'll keep it going, and they're just doing this around. So if the University of Notre Dame can do this, then of course the youth programs in all of our communities can as well. Simple and easy, and a great way for a kid to learn the basic principles of just getting it in their stick, which is a feat in itself. So besides that, once we start having the competition element, right, now there's an opponent who also wants the ball. What are some of the concepts here of getting it away from a kid in another color penny?
Sure. I think of another example that's a low-hanging fruit that can also be translated all the way up to the highest levels, and that's box out ground balls. There's a few different ways you can do this, but you're going to have players partner up. If you can get players of similar size and ability, that's great, but you certainly don't need to. They're going to compete against each other on the field, so it's all good. But we're going to partner up. One way you can do this is to have the ball. Obviously, the ball's on the ground, and you can have player A, let's say, be on defense and player B be on offense. So I'll draw this out for those that can see this. If the ball's on the ground here, if I have player A on offense and then player B on defense, what I would do is on the first whistle, player B is just trying to get to that ground ball, whereas player A is sort of boxing them out. And then on the second whistle, it becomes an actual ground ball battle, right? Where ideally, if player A did a good job boxing out, they just have that right in front of them ready. The other way to do this, which maybe makes a little more sense for the younger kids to start out, is butt to butt ground balls. So that just means balls in the middle. Player X, player Y are going butt to butt, back to back. They're going to sit in an athletic stance. The ball should be right in the center between the two of them. On the whistle, they're going to try to box each other out and scoop that ground ball up. As you started to mention, like the competitive side of this, I think it just makes it more fun. And it's also super, super contextual. Like very rarely does a ball just like roll to you in the speed of play in lacrosse. And so more often than not, you're going to want to incorporate a level of competition so that you are getting the feel for that and starting to, kind of get the physicality aspect of the game embedded into the technique drill itself.
So with what you've demonstrated there on the whiteboard, that first one where one is on offense, one is on defense, you had two whistles. One in which you start that, get in their defensive position, they're doing the box out, they're trying to hold them off. Maybe there's like 3-4 seconds before that second whistle comes. Is that the same for when it's equal one-on-one back to back? Is there two whistles, or is it just on the whistle, do what you can to get that ball right away?
The latter. Yeah,
The latter,
exactly.
one
So,
whistle.
Yep.
And you can do this. This goes without saying, but you can pair these kids up and they spread around your gymnasium space. And all it takes is one or two coaches to kind of attend to a lot. What would you be looking for as a coach walking around a group of, let's say there's 30 players, 15 groups of two? What is standing out for you that you feel you have to intervene and attend as opposed to let them play, they'll figure it out?
Well, I think the safety aspect of the first example I gave, if you've got the offensive player that's like charging, running, and trying to bulldoze the player who's trying to work on their box outs, there's a little bit of, not going at say 50%, but maybe there's a sort of a level of, hey, I need player A, the player on offense here, to understand part of your job is to help player B practice their box outs. And so making sure that, of course, we hope that the matchups make sense for the most part, but the offensive player that's kind of trying to challenge the defensive player who's boxing out to let them work on that a little bit and work within what makes sense, which is something that really takes practice and will need correcting as you walk around. And of course, we don't want a player to get pushed from behind and fall down, and that's not good for anybody to be in an unsafe environment like that. The next thing would be kind of what I started to mention in the first drill, which is once that second whistle gets blown, or on the first whistle in the butt-to-butt GBs, having the coaching cue of like after they scoop up that ground ball, I could even say, hey, after you scoop it up, pass it to your partner, to start to just train the scan and be ready to throw. That's something that I might be walking around coaching up. And then the second piece last piece rather would be, I'm looking for the technique itself. What you're looking, if you're on a basketball gym, players can actually really get away with bad habits of like keeping their butt end way too high as they scoop. And so I'm really going to look for the foundational technique that hopefully we would have already worked on our first drill, which is getting both butts low and really stepping and scooping through, avoiding raking the ball, putting the stick over the ball and then pulling it back to get the ball possessed. Of course, that does work in certain scenarios, but it's definitely not what we want to teach as a foundational part of scooping.
Right. So before I move on to pillar 2, passing and catching, do you encourage any drills where there's more than just one-on-one? You might have 2-on-2s or 3-on-3s, maybe an uneven situation, 2-on-1s. Will you ever line the kids up and kind of battle it out?
Yeah, certainly. There's a few examples of that. I think, 2-on-1 ground balls where you're going man ball as an example, where one player is going to focus on boxing out. You've got 3 lines. The line in the middle is by themselves. The 2 lines on the outside are on a team together. Depending on where the ball ends up or who's faster and things like that, one player tries to cut the other player off and the other can go scoop hands free. That's always a good one. There's also another example in that same 3-line scenario where it's 1v1v1, kind of every player for themselves. That's a great one as well. A lot of different ways to slice and dice that. So yeah, that's a good call out. Any others that you would add to that?
So winter skills as well as any time, I always love to find a way of incorporating running. And so you can hide that running in plain sight as opposed to just lining them up and having them sprint. So when we do lines, I love to have that ball kind of launched, let them get a little bit of that. We have a ways to go. At the youngest levels, I really like musical chairs, ground balls. That's when you create an area and you count, let's say I have 8 kids. Okay, there's 7 balls. So you're creating that urgency, that scarcity. Somebody's not going to come away with the ball. And I've done this before with the youngest levels because it feels like it's kind of a fun game. But I've done that before an older group, a group of 7th and 8th graders have come in, saw how much fun we were having, and they said to their coach, can we do that? And the coach says, absolutely. That's great for any level. There's no such thing as too old to be competitive. So musical chairs, ground balls are a really great one as well. Anytime, I'm going to just mirror one thing you said. It's really important to me in my program. Anytime we do any drill, it's never just one component. It's never just go pick up a ball, mission accomplished, come back in line. You turn it into something else. So I love the concept of scanning, finding that open space, and using an outlet. So one of the most popular drills in my program is the one-on-one ground ball, where they're all free agents. They're picking it up, and then as soon as they do, they have to get away from the action and find an outlet, which is typically a coach or maybe a player in line. The other two will remain out there. We'll send a second ball, and now it's a one-on-one. That kid will get it, find their outlet, roll away, hit the coach, and then just for added measure, let's throw out one final ball and let that last kid have the opportunity to scoop up as well. And that whole thing takes less than a minute. So you can run that over and over and over again. So I think you nailed it. Those are great ground ball drills, lots to play with, lots to have fun with there.
Yeah. Everyone gets a rep there. I love that, making sure on that one-on-one that everyone does get a rep. And then one more that I would add, especially for coaches that are working with the younger age group, maybe K through 2, is Hungry Hippos, making it feel like a game, and you can slice and dice this so many ways. Ideally you've only got 3, maybe 4 players kind of per team, per line. All the balls are kind of scattered out throughout the middle, let's say the soccer circle, something like that. And you're going to blow the whistle and they have to go and they can only scoop one at a time. And it's kind of like a little challenge in and of itself just to go as hard as you can. And, at the end of that, you count how many your team has and it feels like a game. But you can also add on to that, to make it more relevant for, say, an older group, to make it still feel like a fun game, but adding in extra skills as an example. What you could do is have, after they scoop, they can pass it back to the line to add the passing and catching component of it. You could even add a cutting component where they scoop and then the next person in line has to V cut and then they can pass, and that's how you complete the rep, and then they can go in and get their scoop. I've done drills where you've got different colored lacrosse balls. Maybe you've only got a couple of yellow lacrosse balls. Those ones are worth 2.
The magic ball, that's right.
Yeah, or maybe you just have one that's different colored, and that one's worth 5 or something like that. Where, as soon as you blow the whistle, all 4 players are all going to go for that one ball.
Yeah, they will.
So, there's ways to make that fun too.
The bonus ball. I love that. That's great. So we get the ball in our stick. That's a huge victory in itself. Now we're looking to move it. We're looking to keep possession. We're looking to pass it to our teammates. So passing and catching becomes such an enormous and difficult skill. We had a whole episode on the warm-up where we talked about technique and conditioning here. You can never do too much. There's countless opportunities. But what is your go-to for an early season winter skills type practice where some kids have never even held a stick, and here we are asking them to start doing the most challenging thing, throwing and catching it. So what are we thinking here?
Sure. I won't spend much time, but I'll mention partner passing. Everyone knows about it. You're obviously going to be there. Triangle passing, groups of 2 and 3. I typically tell coaches to have that be their pre-practice drill as players are coming in, even if they don't know how to pass and catch yet. Let's try it, even if they're chasing the ball and practicing their scooping, partner and triangle passing. But what I would like to progress to, very rarely are you going to be doing anything standing still in this sport, both passing and catching. So I'll give you an example of a simple way to take your partner passing and make it a little bit more contextual. So if I've got 2 lines of players, all right, let's say they're about 10 yards apart, right? Maybe I've got cones up here. Maybe I've got a line. Maybe it's half field or something like that. Then I'm just going to have them continue to play catch as they're both moving up the field in tandem, right? There's a lot of philosophy that can go into this. In some of our drills, we've talked about having our stick up field. That makes a lot of sense. However, early on, you could also not do that. You could also just say, hey, I want you to run, and even if you're going to be catching it behind your body, you can stay in your strong hand for now. We could do that jogging forwards. We could do that backpedaling. We could do that shuffling. So that's a good way to add different layers of different footwork challenges within the passing and catching. But that's a really low-hanging fruit. Not really sure what I call that drill, but we're partner passing on the move, I guess.
But the point is that they're throwing while using their lower body as well, and not just in a stationary pivot form, but getting them to be able to do it directionally. I love the idea of maybe they're side shuffling along, so they're facing each other, giving them more eye contact, giving them more of a sense of target. Backpedaling I like too. That's probably a little bit more challenging, I would imagine. But just the concept of don't worry about your weak hand right now. Right now, focus on accurately connecting with a teammate while you are moving in the same direction together.
That's right. And then there's also the challenge that many coaches face, which is I've got brand new players, I've got advanced players. This is an easy one to just say, hey, if you're a club player, you've been here for a couple of years, what have you, you're going to go full speed. I want you to run full speed here and still try to get as many passes as you can. Or maybe I even let the younger or less experienced players walk. It's still kind of the same concept, but this gives them the chance to not get so far ahead of, man, I'm like moving and I still don't know how to catch and it's all too much. So we can really vary the degree of difficulty based on the speed that we ask of them.
Sure. We've talked at length at the concept of line drills, but line drills are something that would be great for winter skills. Are there variations of a line drill that you might change based on winter versus what you might do in the spring or in game day, as we talked about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not based on it being a different season, but I've also mentioned in the past, varying it into a throwback line drill. And I think one thing that I didn't mention in the ground ball section that can be relevant in say a throwback line drill, where I've got a line of players and then a cone about 7 or 10 or 12 yards away from that line that they're going to head out to that cone and throw it back. Right, that's kind of your basic version of a throwback line drill. Well, when we do the ground ball version of that throwback line drill, I can have the player cover the ball with their stick and kind of relax their hand so that when the next player runs through that ground ball, they're actually kind of scooping through a pseudo check, if you will, covering the ball. And it's really, really low-hanging fruit to have that player experience scooping through a ground ball with a slight little bit of pressure added there. So I would say throwback line drills, and then you can start to add on the concept of like, throwing over the shoulder. So now I have to catch over the shoulder rather. So I'm running away from my line towards that open cone. And the second player in line is going to try to lead me to where I'm going. And now I'm practicing catching on the move away. That can be something to add into the throwback line drill environment. Anything jump out to you as far as a variation for a line drill that feels relevant here?
I think we've talked a little bit about the star drill, which is a variation of it. I like for winter skills the traditional running towards each other because I can also add in that ground ball. We're kind of coming back to the ground ball because the ground ball drills that we talked about have either been stationary or they've been ground balls away, where we're chasing the ball as the coach rolls it out. Sometimes that ball is kind of coming too. So when you're doing a traditional line drill coming at each other, you can vary up all the different directions that a ball is going to be moving or not moving. So for that reason, I like doing this because then they're already in their lines. They start with ground balls. The motion and the movement doesn't change. You just blow a whistle and say, all right, pick it up and start throwing. So I do like, you're running at each other. I also love the throwback as well, but it looks like you might have dissected something for us. So let's talk us through what you have up there.
Sure. So yeah, another one to kind of really focus on passing and catching, but like you mentioned, we're always adding more to it, right? This is also going to enhance their ability to cut and get in a good habit of cutting after passing. Yep. So I call this 4 cones, 3 athletes. What I've got is a box of cones here. I probably put this, depending on the age group, 7, maybe 10 yards apart for like a 7th or 8th grade group, and shrink it as needed. So I'm always going to start the ball in one of the corner players, just not the one that's kind of in the middle per se. Mm-hmm. Right. So now what I'm going to do is have them pass to the middle player and cut away. It's a continuation of that on repeat. So this player is going to pass to the player who's kind of in the middle, and then they're going to cut to the open cone. This player is going to catch that, pass to the player that's now in the middle, cut to the new open cone, because this player would have ran over here. It's a continuation of that. This is another scenario where it makes sense to kind of, hey, when we're going in this direction, everyone can be throwing righty so their sticks to their outside, or throw right, switch hands, catch left, or catch right, switch hands, throw left, or catch right, roll away, throw left. So you can add those variations into a drill like this, but this is an amazing environment to get a big group of players. Obviously, you have to set a bunch of cones up beforehand. Everybody's moving. Really, no one is standing still in something like this, which I personally love. And then what I would add on as a really, really helpful variation to this is you add a cone to the center of the square. And now every time they cut, they have to cut to the center cone first, which turns every cut into a V cut. So this player is going to catch the ball, throw it, and then they're going to cut in to then cut out to set them up for their next catch as the ball works its way around. So yeah.
That's great. That teaches a couple of different things. So what you're really reinforcing here is we move the ball and then we move ourselves. Get into that really good habit of not just this is my space, I'm not leaving it. But what you're doing there is one directional, right? You're kind of constantly going in the same direction. There's not that flummoxing change of I might throw it back at you. It's kind of very linear in terms of I'm hitting you and then I'm hitting either the middle cone and then the open one or straight to the open one. But you can keep it directional and then maybe halfway if you wanted to challenge them, you could reverse direction.
That's exactly right. And because it's a little bit more scripted in that way, it's an opportunity to teach and coach timing. This has if we time this correctly, hopefully the player is cutting, getting to their cone, and right as they're kind of getting there, they're able to catch pretty shortly after that. We don't want them to get to the cone, wait for 3 seconds, and then get the ball thrown at them. That's one way to kind of know if your square is too big or too small. That's something that'll come as players get better at catching, because of course if the ball gets dropped, that's going to affect that. And then the other piece to that is kind of almost like a man up concept, where as I cut to my open cone, I don't want to just stare at where I know the ball is going to come from. I'm going to cut to that open cone. I'm actually going to square myself up to the center of the box so I can catch that, and I'm already kind of scanning and seeing more of the field. So there's a little bit of sort of a higher level concept you can add into that if you've got players that are, zipping the ball around and moving quickly.
So this and a number of similar ones like this, if you had a lot of players, you can either do stations where they come to this during station 3 and do it, or you can say we're all going to do this at the same time and you're going to create a number of these boxes. You as a coach, you're kind of walking around attending as needed. Good habit, right? To have a lot of balls at these cones. When they do miss that pass, we're not stopping and chasing it. They just pick it up and keep that moving, right?
That's right. And because there's so many different versions of this, of hey, I want you to switch directions, or hey, we're going to do this one catching right and throwing left, or hey, we're going to do this one catching across our body and then throwing, things like that you can add in. We typically do 30 seconds. Hey, we're going to go get as many as you can for 30 seconds. Everybody, at the end of that, we're gonna change up the scenario. And so, yeah, my hope is that I can entice players to sprint after that ball if they need to, or get the one that's closest to them because we've got extra line around.
Amazing. So before I move on to the next pillar here, I just want to say that I like to pick a couple of drills for passing catching, run them on repeat. So every week we're kind of revisiting the same ones, and you can either make them more challenging with different wrinkles, different maybe timing, different pace, but you could also have a different focal point as a coach. The first time you're focusing on the passing aspect. The second time you can say, we're really going to focus on the targets that we're giving each other. And then you can do this a third time and say, now we're going to be focusing on the communication. What are we saying when we're open? What are we saying to get our teammates' attention? How are we saying it? And so you can run the same thing, but it doesn't feel like the same drill over and over again.
I love it. And that's a great example, Coach, of a bigger picture concept we've talked about in the past. You don't need to get all new drills all the time, especially week to week. You probably don't want to do that. You want to have the ability to take your drills, make them simpler or more challenging based on your group, and then have different focal points. If you've had a game in the last week, obviously not for winter skills, but if you're in your season and you're coming off of a game weekend and you really struggled with off ball movement, it's like, okay, let's make that the focus of this stick work drill that we've already been doing. And I think that's a very important concept for coaches to remember. Same drill, added focus point, or more specific focus point for that particular practice session.
So only because I haven't yet memorized and stolen your cadence, and I have it written on my note card is what the next one is. We're going to call this next part attacking the net. You had a better way of saying it, but this is your shooting. This is your dodging, which is, for those of you who are new, dodging is making an athletic move around a defender to create some space, give yourself a shooting opportunity. You can do this in tandem. You can take these separately, but if we were to combine them into a couple of drills that allowed a player with a ball to go and score, what are some A, basic concepts, and B, some of your favorite drills here?
I'll try not to go on too much of a tangent here. So I would first say that I would do this differently depending on my group size. If I've got a bigger group, typically what I like to do is really coach at a minimal amount and kind of put out 1 or 2 cones and say, hey, here's your imaginary defender. Here's some cones you're going to try to get to. If you go righty, try to get to this cone. If you go lefty, try to go to this cone, and then shoot, go. So I can now watch everybody and I can see, okay, what do they actually do if they don't get a lot of direction? That's typically what I would do if I have a bigger group. If I have a smaller group, say in a private lesson setting or maybe a station, right, where you've got less kids, I actually like to work backwards. I'll start with the shot and then I'll work backwards into the dodge that helps them set that shot up. So that's just a little bit of context. Let's start with the dodging from a principle standpoint. What I've learned to be the most effective type of dodge is a change of speed combined with a change of direction. Too often I see players focusing on the change of direction, but they don't change speed. So they're like going left to right, but it's not deceptive to the defender because the change of speed didn't throw anybody off. And I think change of speed is probably more important. I've seen dodges work where you don't change direction. You're running in a straight line or maybe a slightly curved line, and you just do a really good job of slowing down and then speeding back up. So that is an incredibly important concept and low-hanging fruit for coaches to be like, let me see if I can have my players practice running on a straight line while cradling, and then on the whistle, they have to hit the brakes and slow down to a walk. And then on the next whistle, they have to sprint, and it turns into a reaction drill. That's actually a dodging drill right there, right? And then when it comes to the shot itself, I typically break it into 3 categories. I'm either working on set shooting, on the run shooting, which is also jump shots, because those happen on the run, and then inside finishing. So I really like to typically start with on the run because it's harder to teach, and you got to get started on that. And everybody has been told, hey, when you're a righty, step with your left foot. That's the right way to throw a ball. I wouldn't say it like that. That's the correct way to throw the ball in a set shot or time and room, as some coaches call it, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas on the run, which is 90% of your passes and shots probably is while you're having to run, it's actually off of the other foot. For a righty, they're actually going to have their right foot in front as at the moment of release. And so I like to set up a drill where I set up an arc of cones. So if I draw this out for those that are watching, if I've got the net here, I'll put an arc of cones. This is for my righties. I'll just mirror this for my lefties. And I'm going to have the players try to keep those cones on their left. And I won't even necessarily go into like, hey, you're supposed to, you're going to try to shoot off your right foot. I don't want you to overthink it. All I'm going to say is don't stop running. Throw that ball at the net as hard as you can without stopping your feet running. They'll naturally do it off the correct foot. And what I'm going to start to try to teach, without going too much further into the technique, is the concept of finishing with momentum towards your target. Sometimes coaches will teach kind of spinning into a back pedal. You can do that, but it's not necessarily what's needed. If I just make sure that I'm kind of running towards ideally the back pipe as the ball releases or just after the ball releases, you're going to get an increase in power and accuracy from that. And this is going to help them with their passing on the run and shooting on the run, which is most of the passes and the shots they're going to get. So I like to start and spend time here.
If you have a new player and they've never taken a shot before and they came to session number 3 and you were doing this drill, would you care about arm angle early on, like overhead versus maybe 3/4 versus sidearm? Are you correcting that, or are you just worried about the concept of keep your feet moving? That's more important than anything. The other stuff will come later.
It's a great question. I'm definitely not focusing on it nearly as much as the footwork. If I can get the footwork down, I can always add on different types of release points. What coaches will find is what most players do naturally is kind of this kind of 3/4 release, maybe even closer to sidearm, because as humans, we're naturally lazy, and that's what happens. And there's a huge advantage in being able to throw it straight over the top, as close as you can to straight over the top. And I will kind of make that a case-by-case thing. If I see a player that's way too close to sidearm, I will correct that pretty early.
Okay.
To get them at least to that natural 3/4. But I am trying to add in the concept of the value of being able to have a true overhand release in your arsenal very early on in the teaching shooting process.
So this is a bigger concept, but when you have a shooting drill, do you have a goalie?
Not for volume. I think that's probably not the best idea. You know, if you've got a goalie in the cage in a drill like this, you'd have to wait till the goalie's reset in between reps. However, if towards the end of a set where we've already gotten a bunch of reps, I think it is incredibly valuable if we do have a goalie present. Let's get them some live shots, and if possible, you know, we can finish like that. But I think for the majority of the drill, my personal opinion would be no goalie to start. If I can have sort of like a target in the cage, maybe I can hang a cone up in the corner to add that level of accuracy. That's great. You know, but that's something that we would build to. And obviously, if we're going to play some sort of scrimmage game, or you know, building to more competitive type of drills, like say 1-on-1s, 2-on-2s, that's where it makes more sense to get the goalie in the cage.
I'm very similar. I have a typical rule of thumb, which I adhere to 99.99% of the time, but that's I don't put a goalie in net unless there's at least one defender in there as well, which is sort of why I have sort of the segue of combining these two skills, because one of my go-to drills for shooting is really a one-on-one dodge and shot. So you have a defender, you have somebody, and it doesn't have to be a closely dissected, we're going to do a split dodge, or we're going to teach you a roll dodge or a face dodge. It's just, hey, here's your defender, get around and see if you can get a shot off. And when you do this from, let's say, even 4 points, top left, top right, back left, back right, gives the goalie the time to reset. As you said, I think that's the most important, and why you don't do it with volume is because the goalie needs time to prepare. So the goalie will typically light off the next rep and say, ready, and then we'll go. That's why I kind of combine these, but I totally understand why these are two different skill sets, and you want to teach shooting first and then say, all right, let's get to shooting through dodging. So before we move on to we're kind of dancing around the defense anyways, but is there any other thing with shooting and dodging at an early season? And by the way, I think you and I are going to like take each of these pillars and do a whole episode on each one.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to like get into everything you've ever learned about shooting and dodging. We'll get there. But what are some other quick go-to either dodge and or shooting drills great for winter skills?
I'll stick with a concept that applies to all the different types of shots, particularly shots where you're mid-range to outside shooting, so your set shots and your on-the-run shots. What I tend to see as a common mistake that I'm looking out for, regardless of how I'm setting the cones up and whatnot, is players that are putting way too much power and effort and emphasis into the wind-up itself. You know, they get like this big, elaborate wind-up, and you see players actually lose ball control. You know, so I like to have a calm and a quiet wind up and an aggressive follow through. So that's part of why, like I mentioned earlier, I actually like to work backwards if I'm able to work with an individual or a smaller group. And the very first thing I do in working backwards is just the follow through. You know, I'll set them up with whichever foot in front that the shot is going to be. And I'm just practicing with no ball in their stick, getting that wind noise of the head of their stick being able to come through. And that's what I would encourage coaches to do in a clinic, in a winter skills environment, is have everybody spread out with no ball in their stick and say, hey, wind up. When I blow this whistle, I want to hear the wind and feel the wind. And that's a really, really low-hanging fruit to get kids a bunch of repetitions on just focusing on the follow-through of the shot, and they can have that audio feedback of hearing the head of their stick whistling through the wind. You know, when you watch players that are newer and don't have a lot of confidence and kind of really letting it rip, they're actually using energy to kind of like stop their stick. And so just by getting them to just let it follow through and let it flow through, that can be a really helpful coaching cue and tool for coaches and players.
And it's great to kind of not augment, but play it off of the difference between how we throw to a teammate versus how we throw to our opponent's net. And that's a great example of that contradiction there, that difference. So I like that. Defense is a big category into itself, but kind of where we all typically start is the footwork. I'm sure you're similar to me. The first couple of times I'm focusing on defense, put your stick down. Let's play defense with just our bodies. Let's play defense with our hands and positioning, and just take away good angles for them. And that kind of lends itself to then having the basic fundamentals that you can add a stick to down the road to give you more. But let's start with the basics. Is that something that you'll do as well when we're teaching on day one of winter skills? Hey, let's talk about defense.
Yeah, I like to work this into my warm up. I'll even do this before I do some of my stick work drills. So everyone's kind of maybe even in dynamic stretching environment. Okay, everyone's on the line. All right, let me see you get into your defensive stance. Probably we've got no stick in our hands, defensive stance, and then what I'm going to do is get them without realizing it, approaching, breaking down, and then backpedaling, and then reacting. And so what that looks like is, let's say we have a 10-yard increment. When I blow this whistle, I want you to run 10 yards and break down in your defensive stance. And I blow the whistle, and everyone runs 10 yards and breaks down in the defensive stance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on this next whistle, I want you to backpedal back to where you started, maintaining that low stance. So now I've got them moving backwards while maintaining an athletic position. That's really, really important. Then I'll layer in the concept of reaction. And so, right, by definition, defense is kind of a reactionary thing. If they go left, I got to go left. There's certain things that as you get to higher levels of being a defender, you can start to be deceptive as a defender and start to dictate as a defender. But that's not the foundation. It is reactionary by position. And so what I'll do is I'll add in the layer of, as you're backpedaling, I might do this as an audio cue or a visual cue. Let's give the example of the audio cue. As you're backpedaling, I'm going to say left or right. Whichever direction I say, that's the direction you're going to turn and shuffle back to where you started. Okay, and then I'll go over it one more time. I'll say, okay, first whistle, you all run 10 yards and break down. Second whistle, you all backpedal until you hear which direction, and which point you're going to drop, step, shuffle in that same direction back to where you originally started. Ready, go. And so I wait till everyone breaks down. Everyone's sitting there at the 10-yard line waiting for that second whistle. I blow the second whistle, let them backpedal 3 to 5 yards, and then I say the either left or right cue. Like I said, I could also point to make it a visual cue, and now they're practicing reacting while moving backwards, while in the mindset of I'm playing defense right now. That is incredibly valuable without a stick in your hands. You don't need to have a stick in your hands for that, and then we can add that in. So that's where I typically start.
If you have a line of players, I'm just kind of imagining what would be too many, like they're crowding each other. So do you have kind of a magic number if you have like more than 8 and do them in shifts? Or is it just, hey, line 20 kids up along the whole width of the gym and run that?
Everybody, yep, same as I would for my dynamic stretches. That's why it's woven in. Hey, we're doing our leg kicks, or we're doing our Frankensteins. All right, let me see your defensive stance.
Awesome. Anything with a stick, and I know that this is one of the many examples where boys' game is different than girls' game, and sometimes we're going to talk about something that doesn't always apply to the other gender, but checks, poke checks, lift checks, these are kind of the easiest, simplest, most within the rules as best as we can be, legal checks that we can have. When do we start introducing that, or do we at all?
Well, I have something very relevant here, and this is something I'm very passionate about, and I feel strongly about trying to teach coaches, and it does apply to both the boys and the girls game, so it's valuable for this conversation. In my opinion, the first check you should learn is not a stick check. I call it standing your ground. It's being in someone's way and having enough body control to kind of get ran into, essentially, without losing your balance. To me, that's the most valuable check, and it applies to both the boys and the girls game. One of the analogies I use is kind of like a personal bubble. This is true for the younger boys, and this is definitely true for the girls game. If you're going to enter someone else's personal bubble and make contact, a lot of times that's not allowed. And at the higher levels in the men's game, actually, that sets you up to get beat. An offensive player that knows what they're doing, if they see a defender running out at them, that is a good scenario for them to square them up and make them start chasing them because they change directions, right? So what I do to teach this is I do a partner drill. It's called partner offense versus defense. I have partner A on offense facing partner B on defense. We've already worked on our defensive stance, and this is scripted. So I need to get partner A offense on board with doing a certain thing so they can help partner B, who's on defense, experience standing their ground through the point of contact. And I say those words multiple times as I'm coaching it, so they keep hearing, stand my ground through the point of contact. That's what I'm teaching. And so partner A, with the pretend ball in their no stick to start, is going to on the whistle, take 3 hard steps at about a 45-degree angle. So if I was to drop 1 rep of this, I've got partner A, partner B, about a 6 distance apart. And I want partner A to run at about a 45-degree angle just outside partner B's shoulder, such that if partner B didn't move, they would almost kind of brush shoulders. I need partner A to help us work with partner B. When I blow the whistle, partner B is not just going to stand there like a parking cone and let them run by, right? Partner B is going to practice shuffling to their side in the direction that they see partner A moving, and then they're going to actually make contact as they enter, as the offensive player enters the defensive player's personal bubble, which is perfectly legal in both the women and the boys and the girls game. But you do have to add the context of what part of your body makes contact with the player, because you cannot turn that into a cross check. Depending if it's your bottom hand or top hand that gets attacked, you can make contact with your fist, and you can also actually use your forearm to be what they run into. And so I'm going to script these reps. Partner A is going to run, partner B is going to shuffle, and they're going to experience kind of getting ran into and trying to maintain balance through the point of contact. I'll do 4, 5, 6 reps in one direction. Then I'll have offensive partner A. Now they're going to go to their left. Partner B is now going to shuffle to their right and make contact with the other fist or forearm, experiencing it on both sides. And then I'll have partner A and B switch roles. I found this drill to be incredibly effective at all levels. And, you know, at the higher levels, you know, for us, let's say 7th and 8th graders select type of level, you can start to add in the concept of like, hey, you're going to get into a stance where you're trying to force them this way versus that way. But off the bat, we're just playing square defense. We're going to react. We're going to shuffle. We're going to experience getting ran into. And, you know, you've seen this. I'm sure any coach who's listening has set up a one-on-one drill, and it's like, they just get toasted. The field is too big. It's like they're not working on the skill of actually being in someone's way. Well, this is how I work backwards. Same concept as I talked about on offense. This is how I work backwards on defense. I'm starting the defender where I'm assuming they already made their approach, and they approached in such a good angle that they're one step away from being in the offense's way. And then what I can do is move them away from each other and blow the whistle and allow the defense to approach for a couple of steps and allow the offense to set their dodge up for a couple of steps, in which case the offense gets more and more and more of an advantage. Because guess what? Defense is really freaking hard.
Yeah. So one more time, they're holding their ground through the point of contact. That's the mantra.
Standing your ground through the point of contact.
Standing your ground. Awesome. Love
right?
that.
So that what you'll see is like when the player on defense gets ran into, if they don't have enough weight on the correct foot, they'll just get opened up.
Yeah.
And the offense will just kind of go. So now it's still a footwork drill, you know? Yeah, we're working on the first check as I'm making a reference to it, but it's actually a weight distribution drill where once they shuffle, if they have enough weight on that foot, it really alters the offensive player's path. You know, defense isn't about taking the ball away and standing up the player and knocking them down. It's like, no, you just want to be able to veer them off the more dangerous path, and that's actually really effective defense.
That's right. Minimize their effective shot, you know, make it a lower percentage shot and you win your battle. So stick bend, is that totally ornamental throughout, or are there times when we slowly introduce the idea of a poke and lift under the elbow?
I will add the stick in the context of making sure you still have the correct part of your body making contact with them. And I actually add it in pretty quickly. And I basically never add in the poke and lift or anything like that in this context. I want them only focusing on their footwork. So I make that as a completely separate drill if I want to focus on stick checks per se. And for me personally, and what I do for Mass Youth Lacrosse, I really try to hone in on the things that are going to be relevant for both boys and girls. So I tend to stay away from the poke and the lifts and teaching that stuff altogether in many cases.
Makes total sense. So Martin, I think we barely scratched the surface, but I feel pretty confident we've talked enough about a couple of these pillars of these basic building blocks that we can give somebody who's about to maybe start thinking about winter skills coming up a couple of good ideas of areas of focus that they can get into. Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Sure. Yeah, I knew we flew through a bunch of different categories here, and I think that's kind of what it feels like when you're on the field too, right? Is like you kind of
Yeah.
get your stick work and you get your warm up and you get your station and you get some kind of a game you want to set up. Maybe that's the one topic that we didn't cover is kind of different types of gameplay and settled scenarios or unsettled scenarios that you can incorporate. But my hope would be that a coach could listen to this and think, oh yeah, that's a good drill. I should weave into my warm up or as one of my stations. So. Um, yeah, hopefully you guys got something out of this, and we're looking to hear from you guys. So those listeners that are here and engaging with us, please reach out, comment on whether you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. Send us a comment or reach out to the emails that are on massyouthLax.com, which are very open to you guys, and we want to hear what you guys like, don't like, want to hear more of. We're looking for feedback, so please let us know.
Awesome. Really great catching up with you and seeing some of this stuff on the whiteboard. More of this would be great. This has been On the Fly. We want to thank everybody for watching, and good luck in your winter skills and your practice prep. And thanks to all the great folks at Mass Youth Lax who keep us running and energized, because I feel ready to run right through you, make sure that you're not going to stand your ground against me.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye.